we will continue with the Christmas story. Today's story is called The Polar Express. On Christmas Eve, many years ago, I lay quietly in my bed. I did not rustle the sheets. I breathed slowly and silently. I was listening for a sound a friend had told me I'd never hear. The ringing bells of Santa's sleigh. There is no Santa, my friend had insisted, but I knew he was wrong. Late that night, I did hear sounds, though not of ringing bells. From outside came the sounds of hissing steam and squeaking metal. I looked through my window and saw a train standing perfectly still in front of my house. It was wrapped in an apron of steam. Snowflakes fell lightly around it. A conductor stood at the open door of one of the cars. He took a large pocket watch from his vest and looked up at my window. I put on my slippers and robe. I tiptoed downstairs and out the door. "All aboard," the conductor cried out. I ran up to him. "Well," he said, "are you coming?" "Where?" I asked. "Why, to the North Pole, of course," was the answer. "This is the Polar Express." I took his outstretched hand and he pulled me aboard. The train was filled with other children, all in their pajamas and nightgowns. We sang Christmas carols and ate candies with nougat centers as white as snow. We drank hot cocoa as thick and rich as melted chocolate bars. Outside, the lights of towns and villages flickered in the distance as the Polar Express raced northward. Soon there were no more lights to be seen. We traveled through cold, dark forests, where lean wolves roamed and white-tailed rabbits hid from our train. As it thundered through the quiet wilderness, we climbed mountains so high it seemed as if we would scrape the moon. But the Polar Express never slowed down. Faster and faster we ran along, rolling over peaks and through valleys like a car on a roller coaster. The mountains turned into hills, the hills to snow-covered plains. We crossed a barren desert of ice. The great polar ice cap. Lights appeared in the distance. They looked like the lights of a strange ocean liner sailing on a frozen sea. "There," said the conductor, "is the North Pole." The North Pole. It was a huge city standing alone at the top of the world, filled with factories where every Christmas toy was made. At first we saw no elves. "They are gathering at the center of the city," the conductor told us. "That is where Santa will give the first gift of Christmas." "Who receives the first gift?" we all asked. The conductor answered, "He will choose one of you." "Look!" shouted one of the children. Outside we saw hundreds of elves. As our train drew closer to the center of the North Pole, we slowed to a crawl. So crowded were the streets with Santa's helpers. When the Polar Express could go no farther, we stopped and the conductor led us outside. We pressed through the crowd to the edge of a large open circle. In front of us stood Santa's sleigh. The reindeer were excited. They pranced and paced, ringing the silver sleigh bells that hung from their harnesses. It was a magical sound, like nothing I'd ever heard. Across the circle, the elves moved apart and Santa Claus appeared. The elves cheered wildly. He marched over to us and, pointing to me, said, "Let's have this fellow here." The conductor handed me up. I sat on Santa's knee and he asked, "Now, what would you like for Christmas?" I knew that I could have any gift I could imagine, but the thing I wanted most for Christmas was not inside Santa's giant bag. What I wanted more than anything was one silver bell from Santa's sleigh. When I asked, Santa smiled. Then he gave me a hug and told an elf to cut a bell from a reindeer's harness. The elf tossed it up to Santa. He stood, holding the bell high above him, and called out, "The first gift of Christmas." A clock struck midnight as the elves roared their approval. Santa handed the bell to me, and I put it in my bathrobe pocket. The conductor helped me down from the sleigh. Santa shouted out the reindeers' names and cracked his whip. His team charged forward and climbed into the air. Santa circled once above us, then disappeared in the cold, dark polar sky. As soon as we were back inside the Polar Express, the other children asked to see the bell. I reached into my pocket, but the only thing I felt was a hole. I had lost the silver bell from Santa Claus's sleigh. "Let's hurry outside and look for it," One of the children said, but the train gave a sudden lurch and started moving. We were on our way home. It broke my heart to lose the bell. When the train reached my house, I sadly left the other children. I stood at my doorway and waved goodbye. The conductor said something from the moving train, but I couldn't hear him. "What?" I yelled out. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Merry Christmas," he shouted. The Polar Express let out a loud blast from its whistle and sped away. On Christmas morning, my little sister Sarah and I opened our presents. When it looked as if everything had been unwrapped, Sarah found one last small box behind the tree. Inside was the silver bell. There was a noose. "Found this on the seat of my sleigh. Fix that hole in your pocket. Sign this to see." I shook the bell. It made the most beautiful sound my sister and I had ever heard. But my mother said, "Oh, that's too bad." "Yes," said my father, "it's broken." When I'd shaken the bell, my parents had not heard a sound. At one time, most of my friends could hear the bell, but as years passed, it fell silent for all of them. Even Sarah found one Christmas that she could no longer hear its sweet sound. Though I've grown old, the bell still rings for me as it does for all who truly believe. God will bless you. We will continue with the Christmas story. Today's story is called The Santa Within Me. There's nothing so beautiful as a child's dream of Santa Claus. I know. I often had that dream. But I'm Jewish and my parents didn't celebrate Christmas. It was everyone else's holiday. A big party I wasn't invited to. And I felt left out. It wasn't toys I yearned for. It was Santa Claus and a Christmas tree. So when I got married and had kids, I decided to make up for what I'd missed. I started with a 7-foot tree, all decked out with lights and tinsel. The year was 1956, and we were living in New York City. My daughter Claire was only 2. But her eyes sparkled as she smiled at the tree. It gave off warmth that filled every corner of our home. I put a Star of David on top to soothe those whose Jewish feelings were disturbed by the display. And it warmed my heart to see the glitter, because now the party was at my house, everyone was invited. But something was missing, something big and round and jolly with jingle bells and ho. So I bought some bright red cloth and my wife made me a costume. Inflatable pillows filled out my skinny frame. A Santa mask, complete with whiskers and flowing white hair, made me look genuine enough to live up to a child's dream of old Nick. When I tried on the costume and looked in the mirror, there he was. Big as life. The Santa of my childhood. I felt myself becoming Santa. I leaned back and pushed out my pillow stomach. My voice got deeper and richer. "Merry Christmas, everyone." Claire was almost 4 and Danny not yet 1 when Santa first came to our house. They stood in awe, and I saw in their eyes the fantasy and magic of what I had become. Santa was special. He was the personification of kindness and gentleness. He was a little scary, too. For 2 years, I played Santa for my children, to their fright and delight, and to my total enjoyment. And when the 3rd year rolled around, the Santa in me had grown into a personality of his own, and he needed more room, so I sought to accommodate him by letting him do his thing for other children. One day, late in November, I saw this pretty little girl trying to reach a mailbox slot and saying, "Mommy, are you sure Santa will get my letter?" My mind began to whirl. All those children who wrote to Santa Claus, whatever becomes of their letters. A phone call to the postal service answered my question. The dead letter office stored the thousands of letters in huge sacks. The Santa in me went ho, ho. And we headed to the post office. As I began rummaging through the letters, I became a little flustered at the demands and greed of so many spoiled children. Most of the letters were gimme, gimme, gimme letters. But the Santa in me heard a voice from inside the mail sack. And I continued searching until I came upon one letter that jarred me. "Dear Santa, I am an 11-year-old girl, and I have 2 little brothers and a baby sister. My father died last year, and my mother is sick. I know there are many who are poorer than we are, and I want nothing for myself, but could you send us a blanket 'cause mommy's cold at night? It was signed Susie. A chill went up my spine, and the Santa in me cried, I hear you, Susie. I dug deeper into those sacks and came up with another 8 such letters, all calling out from the depths of poverty. I took them with me and went straight to the Western Union office and sent each child a telegram. Got your letter. We'll be at your house. Wait for me. Santa. I knew I could not possibly fill all the needs of these children, but if I could bring them hope, if I could make them feel that their cries did not go unheard. I budgeted $150 and went out and bought presents. On Christmas Day, my wife drove me around. It had snowed graciously the night before, and the streets were thick with fresh powder. My first call took me to the outskirts of the city. The letter from Peter Bosky had read, Dear Santa, I am 10 years old, and I am an only child. I'm not sad because I'm poor, but because I'm lonely. I know you have many people to see, and you probably have no time for me. So I don't ask you to come to my house or bring anything. But could you send me a letter so I know you exist? Dear Peter, my telegram began, Not only do I exist, but I'll be there on Christmas Day. Wait for me. Peter's house was wedged between 2 tall buildings. Its roof was of corrugated metal, and it was more of a shack than a house. With a bag of toys slung over my shoulder, I walked up the steps and knocked. A heavy-set man opened the door. He said a word in Polish, and his hand went to his face. Please, he stuttered. The boy at Mass. I go get him. Please wait. He threw on a coat and, assured that I would wait, ran down the street. I stood there in front of the house feeling good. Then across the street, I noticed another shack. Through the window, I could see little back faces peering at me and tiny hands waving. The door opened shyly and some voices called out, Hiya, Santa. I ho! Ho! My way over there, and a woman asked if I come in, and I did. Inside were 5 kids from 1 to 7 years old. I spoke to them of Santa and the spirit of love, which is the spirit of Christmas. Then, seeing the torn Christmas wrappings, I asked if they liked what Santa had brought them. Each thanked me for the woolen socks, the sweater, and the warm underwear. Didn't I bring you any toys? They shook their heads sadly. Who? Who? I slipped up. We'll have to fix that, knowing that we had extra toys in the car. I gave each child a toy. There was joy and laughter, but when Santa got ready to leave, I noticed one girl crying. I bent down and asked her, What's the matter? Oh, Santa? She sobbed, I'm so happy. And the tears rolled from my eyes under the rubber mask. As I stepped out on the street, Pani Paze, Sir, please, I heard Mr. Barsky say across the way. Peter just stood there and looked as Santa walked into the house. You came, he said. I wrote, and you came. When he recovered, I spoke with him about loneliness and friendship, and gave him a chemistry set and a basketball. He thanked me profusely, and his mother asked something of her husband in Polish. My parents were Polish, so I speak a little and understand a lot. From the North Pole, I said in Polish. She looked at me with astonishment. You speak Polish? Of course, I said. Santa speaks all languages, and I left them in joy and wonder. The following year, when the momentum of Christmas began to build, I felt a stirring, and I knew that the Santa within me was back. So I returned to the post office and to those heartbreaking letters. I enjoyed playing Santa so much that I did it the next year and the next. Then, at age 10, Claire handed me a poem that began I know that Santa's make-believe, but I still love him so because he's my daddy-ho. Who? So now she knew. I took her to the basement where the toys were and let her rummage through Santa's shop, ogling at the imposing array. She read the letters and cried with me, and became a true Santa's helper, sorting and wrapping the toys in preparation for my rounds. I made them for 12 years. listening for the cries of children muffled in unopened envelopes, answering the call of as many as I could, frustrated at not being able to answer them all. As time went on, word got out about Santa Claus and me, and manufacturers sent me cartons of toys. Having started with 20 children, I had wound up with 120, door to door from one end of New York City to the other, from Christmas Eve through Christmas Day. On my last call a few years ago, I knew there were 4 children in the family, and I came prepared. The house was small and sparsely furnished. The kids had been waiting all day, staring at the telegram and repeating to their skeptical mother, "He'll come. Mommy, he'll come." As I rang the bell, the door swung open and they all reached for my hands and hold on. "Hiya, Santa. We just knew you'd come." And these poor kids were beaming with happiness and laughter. I took each of them on my lap and told stories of joy, hope, and waiting, and gave them each a toy. All the while, there's this 5th child standing in the corner, a cute girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. I turned to her and said, "You're not part of this family, are you?" She shook her head sadly and whispered, "No." "What's your name?" I asked. "Lisa." "How old are you?" 7. "Come, sit on my lap." She hesitated, but then came over. "Did you get any toys for Christmas?" I asked. "No." She said, "I took out a big, beautiful doll. Do you want this doll?" I nudged her and whispered back, "I'm Jewish too." Lisa grinned from ear to ear. She took the doll I had handed her, hugged it, and ran out of the room.